Hey, my name's TC Burr. Welcome to Yet, a podcast created to encourage you to get your goal or idea out of your head and into reality. On this podcast, you'll hear stories, encouragements, tips, and ideas to help you write your book, start your business, launch your podcast, or whatever it is you hope to accomplish. Because it's not that you haven't done it, it's just that you haven't done it yet. My guest today is Lorena Para. Lorena, how are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for asking. I appreciate you coming on the show today. What I typically do on this podcast is I invite my guests to introduce themselves. So if you don't mind, in 30 seconds or less, would you tell folks a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I am a self-published sci-fi author. I have been self-published since 2019. When I'm not writing, I am homeschooling, I'm chasing chickens off of our backyard, and I'm running an Etsy shop as well.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you have a pretty full life, it sounds like. You've got the
Yeah.
homeschool, you've got the chickens, the Etsy. What do you sell on Etsy, if you don't mind me asking?
I make water bottle stickers and like planner stickers and stuff like that. So, and they're all hand drawn. I cut everything and draw everything here too.
Oh, wow. Okay. And in addition to that, you're also an author, and you said you've been published since 2019, or you've been writing since 2019?
Published.
Okay, awesome. Well, that will lead into my next question then. How long have you been writing? Is this something that's been a part of your life since childhood, or has it something that's been kind of evolved over time? Talk a little bit about that.
Like many authors, I have been writing since I was a kid. It's kind of silly to say, but in second grade, I won a district-wide writing contest, and it kind of went on from there. In middle school, my teacher would always hold on to my creative writing work to show his future students of what he expected and stuff like that. And throughout even my teen years, I would write stories, and that's always who I wanted to be. But I never really had the idea of I'm going to publish a book. I just was like, I'm just going to write and whatever happens, happens. But my official jump into the author world did happen in 19. I had just some crazy tragic backstories that we won't go into, but I needed to do something for myself. And so finally I was like, I'm going to write this story that I've had in my head for a while. And I wrote it in 2-3 weeks, and I never looked back, and I published it. It was terrible, but I published it with no idea what I was doing, and I credit that because I wouldn't be who I am today without that book.
Wow. So you wrote the whole thing in 3 weeks, you said?
It was a novella, but yeah.
Wow. So how many words is that novella? Just so I understand.
So it's anything under 40,000 words. That one was only 17,000 words.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I'm actually revising it right now, trying to put it into, because it's a whole series. I'm trying to put it into a bigger book because they were so tiny.
Okay. And was that a sci-fi right from the beginning?
It was a post-apocalyptic alien invasion story. That's just kind of me. My husband and I, we're not hardcore survivalists, but he has friends in the military, so he did all the camping stuff, and I lived in the backwoods of Albuquerque, and we just kind of to fend for ourselves. So we always have these how are we going to survive the end of the world? And then the end of the world did happen in 2020, and we were semi-prepared, So
And you made it. That's great. That's great. Okay, cool. So you wrote that one in 2019. What's been your journey? What has your journey been like since then? Are you still writing? Have you written more books? Talk a little bit about kind of from then to now. What does your journey look like?
So from then, I learned so much. From that very first book, I went to a local author meet and greet. They were all self-published, and I was like, hey, I published a book too. What's your advice? And the girl was like, I'm so glad you did this, but this is really bad. So here's how you can, she said it kindly, but she was like, here's all the resources that can help you. And it was just such an eye-opener. And I learned so much from that first book that even though it's so bad, I wouldn't be who I am today as this author. And I have, in November, jump around kind of bit. In November, I'm releasing my 6th book. The first 4 are novellas, so they can be lumped into one book, but I published them separately. So there's 6 in total. So I published the first series from 2019 to 2020. Everybody that is my age, they're like, I hate being 30. 30 is the end of the world. And I'm like, by the time I turned 30, I published 4 books. You know what I mean? I published 4 books. I got married. I had a child. Like, this all happened before I'm 30. Like, I'm already living my dream. Like, this is better than I can have ever imagined. And so, in 2021, I wrote my first full-length novel. And that was like 45,000 words. So that's like the very low end of a novel, but I did it. And I was so excited because I never thought I would be able to write that much before. And the day I uploaded it to Amazon for pre-order, my grandma passed away. And that really just knocked the wind out of my sails. Then it just snowballed everything. And so from the end of 2021 to the beginning of this year, I did not write another single word. And it was the beginning of a series, and I was like trying to like restart my career and stuff as like an actual novelist. And I had a surprise pregnancy. My son was born. It was just, my children are 6 years apart. I had to start all over again. And so being just a mom of a toddler who can take care of themselves and I can write, to having to go back and starting over and completely devoting myself to another human being again, really just was not in the cards for writing again. And I tried. I would sit there at my computer and I would try to write. But one day I just like, I want to write again. And I wrote that book in 3 weeks. It was 85,000 words.
Wow.
So I'm a fast writer once I get down into it.
So when you come, okay, so yeah, that's so I for contrast, I've been working on my first novel, which is probably in the neighborhood of like 75,000 words, but it's taken me every bit of a year to do the first draft. It's not like you're like knocking these books out in weeks. So do you just have these ideas that are marinating, and like then when you finally sit down to write, it's just like it's go time and that's, you just knock it out? Or like, have you built an outline in advance, or like how do you, because I think a lot of people might hear this and say, how on earth did you write an 85,000 word novel in 3 weeks? So tell us your secret.
My secret is that I panic. If I don't get it done right now, I know that I will put it off, and never get it done. And so I don't outline. What I do is I have like a word dump document, and I write every scene that I have imagined, even just like a line of dialogue, sometimes even just a setting. None of things in order, and I just put it all down. And then when everything is empty, I start from the beginning and I start putting all of those pieces together like a puzzle. And sometimes they change. Like a character could be saying this, and then I'm like, well, now this fits better for this character to say it. And I'm not bound to anything. I am not a routine person. I don't have like a morning routine, a nighttime routine. I purely work on vibes and feelings and just whatever I feel works. And I know that doesn't work for everybody, but I overthink things. And so sometimes I'll have like a day where I'll write 11,000 words in one day. And those are amazing days. Some days I write half a chapter and I'm just staring at it and I'm like, where do I go next? I have no idea where I go next. And then it clicks after 3 days, or I'll be having a back and forth with my husband and, he'll just like give me ideas and I'm like, oh, okay, that works out perfect. And then I'll have another 11,000 day, again. But that's just, it's not every day. But if I stop, I know I won't pick it up again.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and I think most of us will probably relate more to like the, writing half a chapter and struggling to like that seems a little more normative for me. I just do that a bunch of times over the course of a year and then I end up with a book. So you mentioned early on, so you published your first novella in 2019, and then I think after that, you said you kind of started connecting with some local authors and just kind of building that network, and you got some good feedback from some of those folks and learned a lot, you said. So I'm curious, over the course of your writing journey, what are some of the best things that you've learned? Because I started this show to kind of encourage and inspire new and aspiring writers who are just getting started. And so I love hearing from people who are in the trenches, who have gone through some of the work of writing and publishing and all of that. And just kind of hearing from each of my guests, like, What are some of those best lessons that you've learned that hopefully someone else can take and lean into if it's helpful for them as well? What are some of those for you?
I've learned a lot because I went into this knowing nothing. I didn't even know that really self-publishing was a thing. I thought I was going to have to like start a Kickstarter, whatever fund and GoFundMe and just like find a printer that to like actually print these books for me. And then I was like, Amazon does this? Like, I didn't know Amazon was a bookstore like in its beginning. And so like I learned so much in that first year. As for writing, I think I learned that it really takes the first couple of books to find out who you are as a writer, especially if you write short like me. Like I'm looking back at my stuff and I'm like, wow, this is actually kind of cringe. I don't know who even read this at the first time. It got some good reviews, but it definitely needs some work. As for like learning as like a person writing, don't give up because it gets hard. I'm a very fearful person. I am self-conscious. I'm a huge introvert, and so I let fear stop me from a lot of things. Funny that I even went to this local author meet and greet. It was an hour away. I say local. I live in the mountains. I live far away from everything. I took my cousin and my daughter and her daughter and my cousin's daughter, and I was like, you guys need to come with me. I can't do this by myself. And I went to this thing and I put myself out there. And that's not something I normally do. I wouldn't even be doing this podcast, but it's because of my passion. And I have 2 kids and I want them to see that don't let fear stop you. And so that's kind of like my biggest advice for other people is don't let fear stop you. You will miss out on so many things if you don't push yourself, even if it's scary. It's never as big in reality as it is in our heads.
I love that. That is so true. And I think the fear of, whatever it is, fear of, people finding out you're a fraud, or fear of not being good enough, or falling flat on your face, or what if it doesn't work out? All of that, these are things that we anticipate and imagine before we ever actually do the thing. And like I saw a stat recently that was talking about how like 80% of Americans say they want to write a book, but something like only 1% or 3% or whatever it was ever actually do it. And I think fear is a big reason, because nobody wants to put yourself out there and invest so much of that time and energy and to just feel like, oh, well, that completely failed. But so much of that fear is really just imagined and never even comes to fruition. It's just like, that's just what we think is going to happen. So that's great. That's great. So what are some of the tools or resources that have helped you in your journey? So that's another thing that I'm trying to do with this show is connect people to, whether it's like a podcast or a book or a group or anything that can help a new writer or a new creative with their journey of writing or whatever it is that they're doing. Like, are there any of those resources that you would point to that says, man, this is something, like, if you don't do anything else, make sure you check out this thing? What are a couple of those?
My biggest 2 are the Facebook group 20 books to 50K. So it's 20 books to 50K. So it's the idea is in order to make $50,000 a year, you would need to have 20 books generating sales every single day. And it's a Facebook group. It is the largest self-publishing Facebook group there is, and it is a wealth of information. I have never reached the bottom, and every day more and more authors, more and just people who are in the trenches are pouring into this group, and I've learned so much just from that group. I can't even like begin to explain how much I've learned from that group. So that was the first one. And for podcasts, I have been enjoying your podcast as well, but there's a podcast called The Spa Girls, SPA, and they're the self-published authors. And they're a group of women who are romance authors, but they have so many guests on there from marketing, from actual like Amazon experts and cover artists, and just so much that helps self-published authors. And I will just throw on one of their podcasts while I'm doing dishes or cooking dinner and just pouring into myself while I'm not being able to actively invest in my craft.
That's great. Yeah. Thanks for those. That's awesome. And I'll include all those links in the show notes so that people can kind of connect with all these resources that you're sharing. So you talked about fear as something that, when you went to that first writers group and even coming on this podcast, you said that fear is something that you wrestle with. Like I think a lot of us do. I'm curious, are there any other challenges, and they can be like mindset type challenges or even like practical challenges when it comes to writing and persevering in the work that you're doing? Are there any other obstacles that you're either dealing with now or that you've had to overcome along the way?
That's a great question. I think I put a lot of these obstacles in my own way with my imagination and with, like in reality, if nobody reads my book, I'm not gonna like keel over, you know what I mean? Like
That's right.
it will be painful, but it's not going to be the end of the world. But in my imagination, it is. It's like I'm a horrible human being and everybody hates me. And so
Mm.
that's like my biggest thing. And then I'm also my biggest critic. I honestly, while I'm writing, I'm like, this is hot trash. This is garbage. This is everything. Who would even want to read this? And so having to get over just my own self-doubt is really a big thing. I am, like I said, a huge introvert. I took those Myers-Briggs tests and I'm 100% introverted. So I've really had to step outside of myself and kind of create a persona of somebody who knows what they're doing because I don't know
Yeah.
what I'm doing. And so, and as an author, I kind of can create this person and pretend to be them for a little bit just so I can get the work done. Other obstacles is marketing. I still haven't figured it out. After 5 years, I have no idea what I'm doing. I just kind of throw things at the wall and hope it sticks.
Mm.
There are great resources out there, but I just haven't found anything that's worked for me. And just the fear again of what other people might think. It's none of my business what they think about me, and it's not going to impact my way in any life, or my life in any way. But what other people think about me does scare me, and so those are the hurdles I have to get over. Because at the end of the day, as long as I have contributed to my marriage, contributed to my family, and have poured into my passion, then that's all that I really need to be concerned with.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. So you just mentioned your marriage and family at the top of the show. You said you are a homeschool mom, and you also mentioned something about chasing around chickens. I think those are literal chickens, not
Yes.
figurative ones. So my question related to all of that is, how do you find the time to write? Because it sounds like you have a ton going on. And as someone, we don't homeschool our kids, but we have a lot of friends who do. And so I know homeschooling, like, you don't get a break from like, your kids are always there. So like, how do you find the time to write? Are you getting up at 4 a.m, or like, we talk about kind of if you have any? I know you said you don't have a ton of routines, but like, what's your best kind of like, this is where I find the time kind of thing?
Actually, I get that question a lot because I run my Etsy shop and I do things like I make logos for my friends and stuff like that. And so like, girl, how do you find the time? And I'm like, I don't sleep.
Well,
I
there
just
it is.
I don't. I actually don't like sleeping. I feel like sleeping is a waste of time. I can be doing so many other things while I'm sleeping.
Mm.
And sometimes my body is just like, "No, we need to sleep. You're getting depressed. You're burning yourself out." And I'm just like, "Okay, I'll sleep for like 12 hours and then I'll get like 3 hours of sleep for the next couple of days combined." And that's just kind of me. I'm an over emotional person, and so I pour everything into what I'm doing in that time. When I first started writing my book, my daughter was 3. She's turning 9 in November, but she was 3. And we were going to mommy and me classes at 8 in the morning. And I was going to sleep at like 3 o'clock in the morning some nights.
Yikes.
And so my husband would go to work at 6. We would wake up at 7 and throw food in our mouths and head out the door. Some days we did miss these classes, and I'd be like, I'm so sorry, I stayed up too late writing and whatever. And it was nothing huge. But yeah, I don't sleep, and that's really where I find the time. My days are pretty much dedicated to the family. I homeschool. I have a 2-year-old as well. And so it's like I am always home with the kids.
Yeah.
But thankfully, my husband, he finally talked me into getting this shed so I can have a space away from everything, and have just my own space. And nobody's allowed in here without permission, except for me, obviously, just because he wants me, he's my biggest support. And so he wants me to be able to have the mind space to write.
That's great. Yeah. So you have that physical separation where like you can go there and work and not be distracted. That's great. So I will say, Lorena, you and I, it seems like we have a lot in common. One area where we are very different, though, is I love sleep. Sleep is like one of my favorite things to do. In fact, like so this recording, we're doing this recording on a Friday, and like after I get off work and we get the kids fed and put them to bed, like my wife and I will always like, we have these grand ideas of like, let's stay up and watch a movie. And we are asleep by like 8:30, 9:00, because the week just takes it out of you. So anyway, that's no point in telling you that other than I just think it's interesting. So for most people, I would guess not sleeping is not an option, but for you, it seems to work. Okay. So you mentioned your husband is kind of your biggest supporter, which I think is so amazing. That's another thing that I've kind of found as I've talked with so many people who are writing or doing other cool creative things. That kind of support and encouragement is a critical ingredient to finding success in anything, because like you've highlighted and others on this show have talked about, like, it's not always going to be easy. There are going to be seasons where it's really frustrating and really hard. And in those times, it's really helpful to have someone who's in your corner, who can spur you on and encourage you. And it sounds like you have that in your husband and probably others as well. I'm curious if you can think back to your writing journey. Is there a moment or a particular comment or something that someone said or done for you that stands out as particularly encouraging for you?
It's going to go back to my husband again. He is my really my only family left. I don't have parents. I don't have grandparents. I'm an only child. And so my husband, he has seen it all. We've been married almost 11 years now, and he has been my biggest support. I'm trying not to cry. I'm very emotional. And my husband is my best friend, first and foremost. And he is my biggest encourager. And I try to be that for him too. Like, I'm always in his corner as well. Like, I always want to be what he is to me. And so even just before I did this interview, he's like, you're the best author. You got this. You're amazing. You're going to sell a million books, like just pouring into me. And I'm not even doing it justice because I'm trying not to cry. My husband is, everybody should have a husband like mine. He is supportive. He takes the kids away sometimes so that way, before I had my office, so that way I could write. He would book me a hotel so that way I could just have room service and not think about anything and just have my own space. And so he is such an encouragement. I will come to him crying. I'm like, I'm such a terrible writer. And he's like, you're not. You're an amazing writer. He reads everything that I write, chapter by chapter. I'm like, hey, can you read these like 15 chapters that I just wrote? And he's like, sure, it's 3:00 in the morning, but I'll do my best. And so he is my biggest support. And I love him for it. And it's not just like one thing he says. Sometimes it's the tough love. Like, you need to stop feeling sorry for yourself and pick yourself up and go, and he knows my limits and I know my limits. And sometimes he has to remind me of them.
That's great. That's so cool. What a way to honor your husband and thank him for all the great support that he shows for you. That's super cool. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, a couple more questions and then I'll let you get out of here. The first is, a lot of times when I'm talking to people on this show, they are people who are thinking about or working on their very first book. Sounds like you've kind of gone through this a couple of times. So I'll change the question a little bit. I've asked some of my debut authors, is there a moment in time that you think about where like you'll finally, like for you, that's the moment that you've kind of pictured in your mind? So for some people, it would be like, getting a box of their printed books in the mail for the first time, opening, do the unboxing thing. For other people, it's like, walking down the bookstore and seeing your work on the shelf of the bookstore or something. So I'm curious for you, but so it's a two-part question for you. Have you had moments like that you would point back to and anchor to and say, that was such a powerful moment when I did that, or when that experience happened? And then are there others that you're looking forward to that maybe haven't happened yet?
There are a few. Early on in my writing journey, I used to enter writing contests just so I can get active feedback. And I did, it's called NYC Midnight. And there are different levels of these contests. There's like a 100-word contest that you have 24 hours to write. And then there's like a 250-word contest where, again, you have short time to write. And then you have like a 5,000-word story and you have like the week to write it. And I entered all of those. And the first couple of times I entered these contests, you get like random generated whatever. And they loved my first 2 stories enough to bump me to the second out of 3 rounds. And it was like a couple of thousand people dwindled down to like 400 people. And I had made it to the top 10 of my group. And that was such a great feeling because I know I wasn't going to win. It was the first time I had ever like really done something like this, but to make it to the second round of like this really big contest a few times just felt really great that like, okay, I'm not as bad as I think I am.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And so I that was one of them. Another one that happened more recently is I got a message on Instagram from just a random stranger, and she's like, I've been reading your books and I want to do fan art for your story, and like blah blah blah, you're such an encouragement. And I'm just like, some random stranger that I don't even know is telling me how much that they like my stories and they want to spend time putting back into my story with some fan art. And that just happened like maybe 2 months ago. And I've been writing since 2019, like I said, but that felt like, okay, I am now an author. Like, I'm not just someone who publishes books, I'm an author and I'm changing people's lives.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Thanks for sharing. Okay, last question. And this one is an easy one. This has been so much fun. And thank you for joining. Where can people connect with you? Follow along with your work, buy your books, get some stickers on Etsy. Give me all the links. How do people connect and follow along with what you're doing?
Okay, I am on Amazon exclusively for now as Lorena Para. I have all my books up there. My next book is coming out in November. And everything else, I am The Short Writer on Instagram, Threads, and Facebook. And I have a website called theshortwriter.com. And my Etsy shop is lolopaints.com, Loeloe. And I sell hand-drawn and hand-cut stickers there.
Awesome. Lorena, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it. And I hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you would do me a huge favor, if you got value out of this podcast, which I'm assuming maybe you did since you're still here, would you scroll down to the bottom of your podcast app and rate and review the show? And maybe share it with someone on social media or with a friend, just in a conversation. It would mean so much to get this message out to more people, and I think it would be amazing if you would share it. So that would be, as a personal favor to me, I'd really love it. Also, if you want to know more about me and what I'm working on, you can visit my website. It's tcburr.com. I hope you'll check it out. You can contact me there. Thanks again, and I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you soon.